I talked this morning about this program and what it's taken to be able to invest in it. And one of the things I said is that we've had this incredibly passionate team. We've had these incredibly courageous public servants who've partnered with us, and that we have also had some incredibly risk-tolerant funders. We are really, really privileged to have a set of those. But there's one in particular who's been really encouraging of us and pressing us and pushing us forward, not just sort of holding us accountable to every little thing, but really saying dream big and do big things. And that person is Reid Hoffman. He's been helping us on a number of fronts, not just with our, with funding, but really with a framework for our work that says this is how all the things that you're doing add up to something that matters. I wanted him here first to thank him and get to know you guys as a community a little bit, but he is much, much more than a funder of Code for America. He supports many, many other amazing organizations in our network. I hope you've all heard of Crisis Text Line, Change.org, PopVox, CrowdPack, and the Open Technology Institute at New America, many, many others as well. That's just some of them. He has just an incredibly interesting way of approaching the world and making change, and we're going to draw that out of him a little bit. He's been incredibly influential in Silicon Valley as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and really as a public intellectual speaking for this sort of 21st century way of thinking. I kind of think of him as the chief of this tribe in Silicon Valley that has a particular point of view around government that outsiders think is very rare here, and it's not. But he's really tried to build upon his experience in Silicon Valley to enable government leaders and others to continually improve their work and their impact. And hopefully that message of continual improvement sounds really familiar almost at the end of our first day here. So I'd like you to help me welcome Reid Hoffman to the stage. Come on in. Hello.
Hello.
Have a seat.
Your mic's working?
It's working now. I'm not known for my really strong voice, so I'm really glad the mic turned on. So thanks so much for coming here.
Pleasure and an honor.
I don't think you heard him yet, but John Hagel spoke this morning about this idea of narrative and story. I hope you all appreciated this one. And when we asked you to speak, one of the first things I thought of was the sort of narrative about Silicon Valley and its anti-government tendencies, and the voice that you have been to change that narrative or to tell a different story. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about why that's important to you.
So, let's see. One of the things is Silicon Valley technologists and companies have a natural thing of saying, look, we start with a couple people, we invent a piece of technology, and we can actually use that as an Archimedean lever to change the world, and we do that in a very time and capital efficient way of doing it. So whether it's creating Airbnb or LinkedIn or Facebook or Google or any of these things, we provide these really critical services on very high efficient capital. And so we tend to say there's a reflex within the whole valley to say this is the only game that matters. None of the other games matter. And the truth is complex, which is it's clearly not the only game that matters. There's a lot of other games that matter. And in fact, actually, when you get to a bunch of different things that matter in our society, everything from kind of justice and social justice and education and medicine and a bunch of other areas, there's really important work that doesn't fit within a Silicon Valley technology company. I mean, it can be improved and touched upon in various ways, but that's really important, and that part of how we shape all that is through the government, how we live in a society together, how we have rule of law, contracts, corporations, educational systems, medicine, all of these things comes through this kind of shared governance. And so what I try to be is, as a small force for this, you're a major force for this, is trying to help Silicon Valley folks realize that A, government's just important by itself, B, changes in government make major differences in the outcomes for people's lives. I mean, for example, there's $500 billion in safety net spend in government already. If we can make that more effective just by government, just by technology, you just saw the food stamps work, which is important and amazing. If you can do that, you can make huge differences in people's lives. And so, and part of how I explain that, sorry, going on a little bit longer, but to the Silicon Valley folks, is the simple way of looking at scale is number of people, depth of impact, and time. You multiply these three things together. And technology is a great way of doing that because you can do that with a kind of a relatively low cost basis. That's one of the reasons why super important work like Code for America. But you can also do that with just kind of small intelligent process changes, sometimes also leveraged by technology. And so I think that the important thing is to realize, say, look, these companies that we build, these products that we build are great things. They are these important parts of leverage. But how do we apply also these techniques to things like government? How do we take the position that the things that we do, and how do we help the broader ecosystem? Because we all live here together. And that's part of the tie between Silicon Valley and government.
Yeah, and you have done such a great job in the past 8 years building this bridge between these communities and sort of speaking up for the need for it, but also sending people, encouraging people. So tomorrow we're going to have DJ Patil on stage, U.S. I think the first ever U.S. chief data scientist, a former colleague of yours at LinkedIn, and I think someone close in your circles. You encouraged to go do this. He's one of many. So we're going to avoid the topic of the election, but we do have a new administration coming in. Obviously, the state and local level, things change over a different period of time. But how do you see this bridge? How are we going to continue to build this bridge in the next 8 years?
So, well, next 8 years will depend somewhat on the election.
Fair enough.
Right. And I have a point of view that one is a disaster and one is a very good outcome. So, that being said, but the
it's okay to express those views. I didn't mean to tamp that down.
Yes.
I think you're well known for that. In fact, we'll talk about some of your efforts to influence that as well.
But I think the really key thing, so part of what's been really transformative within the federal government has been efforts that are actually parallel to what Code for America does, which is how do you build up the digital service, how do you actually have engineers sitting in the room, kind of figuring out how to solve problems, because just start working on the things to solve the problems. And so the raw effort, actually I take Code for America as inspiration for this, was, look, part of what Todd Park did with the healthcare Dove team and building out the digital service, what Megan Smith is doing now, what DJ is doing now, is just getting some really great technologists there saying, I'm going to do a tour of duty here, and I'm going to work on technology that changes the outcome, because the leverage point of the government is huge. I mean, the significant budgets, mandates, ability to affect millions to hundreds of millions, even billions of people's lives. And so the raw thing is to say, let's keep the work that we've done so far in staffing up technology positions, data science positions, other things in the USDS. Let's keep the specific projects, everything from how do we use data to do more intelligent policing, how do we correct bias there, to how do we fix just these basic government service processes, food stamps, right, immigration, other sorts of things, so that we make them much more efficient, because this has huge impacts on people's lives and even on the productivity that we aspire to in society.
So we just got to keep selling the impact junkie story, right?
Well, exactly.
It's not going to go away.
Yes, it's not going to go away. And I think that's what's most fundamental. Now, I think one of the things that when you look at how does innovation happen, we in Silicon Valley, tend to go very much to it's the new startup that discovers something, goes very hard. That's important. That you do that too. But a lot of human innovation is just iteration. It's just smart people doing it year 1, year 2, year 3. And so part of what I see coming out of things like the important work in the USDS and other areas is just saying, hey, we did that last year and we could do it better this year this way, and we're going to do that now. And actually, that incremental improvement when you're at the scale of the US government is mind-boggling.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that is on my mind with that is not always jumping to the new thing and keeping on it, because we also have a lot of people coming from that sort of ADD mindset of do something fun and shiny and then move on to something else. And these things need consistent staffing. So it's part of the way we've been thinking at Code for America. And I think more broadly, it's great to see people come in and get really addicted to the work and want to stay on it. We're going to have to keep that flow of talent coming through in order to not just sort of jump on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Because the sea of things is endless.
Yeah, and also, I mean, exactly, look, how you get compounding is not jumping to the new shiny object.
Right.
It's continuing to improve the really key things that make big differences in people's lives.
Yeah, and 6 years in, I hope that that's visible in all of the stories that we're telling.
Awesome.
Yeah. You want to talk a little bit about how you see the role of nonprofits in particular in this ecosystem?
Yep.
Certainly organizations like Code for America. I feel a little awkward saying that given that I run at Code for America. But these very large public services that take a lot of taxpayer dollars and should provide an enormous amount of value. How do you see the nonprofit sector interacting with those public services?
Well, so I think the nonprofit sector is critical for a set of different reasons. Some of it is that there's risks you can take in the nonprofit sector that are very hard for political processes to take. So an ability to be experimental, do things. It can move a lot faster in terms of, because all democratic processes have lengthy budgeting processes, a number of places the budget's spoken for. So changing the ship is actually slow and difficult. Nonprofits can be much more nimble, not just experimental, but fast. Tech development usually requires, like for example, when you're doing software development, you normally need essentially a person who's in charge, like a czar who goes, this is the requirements, this is the product, this is what we're doing.
Yep.
That's harder in a democratic process.
Yep.
Right. That's one of the reasons is, you've struggled with much more than I have, is like, okay, how do we get to a simple requirements with a simple delivery? Well, a nonprofit can do that. That's part of the reason why I think the work that, Code for America and a number of other great organizations are doing is so critical, because we can go be the initial ground troops, we can go set it up, we can do the key technology reinvention, we can try it and see if it works. All of those then fit the kind of allow you to then move faster and then figure out things that can scale in a really good way. I mean, part of the, when we were talking about, kind of all of the great things that Code for America can do after this very long list, it was like, well, actually, in fact, there are so many good government programs that are targeting, how do you essentially keep people in kind of healthy shape, possible members of the workforce, possible great members of society, whether it's food stamps, whether it's economic opportunities. How do we shape those government dollars?
Yep.
A small amount of dollars focused on, transformative work within nonprofits like Code for America can unlock massive social impact.
Right.
And those are some of the areas that I see. And then, I actually, as you know, do both 501c3s and also kind of social impact corporations. Like I think you mentioned PopVox
and Change, right?
And Change, right?
Yeah.
Because both of them are good efforts at this, and then they can essentially tackle different kinds of problems depending on, which way, like what kinds of capital dollars, is it philanthropic dollars, is it capital dollars, which kinds of dollars would be best deployed to making these social changes.
Yeah. So Reid and I are both on this Defense Innovation Board now. You missed the last trip. You missed a really interesting trip. But I was shocked at the contrast. I mean, the amount that we spend in the military is enormous. It's a little under $600 billion. But I thought, wait, that's not that much if we're spending $500 billion on the social safety net. I mean, these are really big problems, and I don't think we think of the safety net as big as like our entire military, but it's not that far off.
Yes.
That is an enormous ship to turn, and I use that metaphor with a lot of current experience being on a ship and trying to watch it turn. So I think you're sort of placing all of these bets around with high leverage. That's your thing, high leverage.
High leverage to scale, the Archimedean lever. And one of the things I learned from Silicon Valley was this notion of, like, its core is this kind of venture financing model, which is you start with a seed bet on something that's risky and determine that you get some data. It's not proof, it's some data. Based on that, you go to a Series A, a Series B, a Series C. You back great entrepreneurs who have the drive, the mission, the skills to assemble the team, the network in order to go through this seed, Series A, B, C, and so forth. And then you escalate, and what you're looking for, like, going back to the scale variable, is number of people, depth of impact with them over time. Part of the over time, and part of why technology is so key to that, is if you're doing a you're kind of a nonprofit that you say, okay, look, we're going to be staffing some engineers. Like, well, staffing engineers that will only scale linearly. But if the tech is then deployed for lots of people, all of a sudden your curve moves from a linear scale to an exponential scale in terms of your impact.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why I tend to focus, most broadly on all of my social impact things within the technology, because it's that exponential curve. Now, there's occasional things like, super important, like Second Harvest Food Bank and other places you say, just food on the table,
Just food on the table.
that matters. Just do that. Doesn't matter, technology, whatever, doesn't matter.
Right.
But when we think about these structural systemic changes about increasing, like for example, if we take just the budget we have within what the government's already doing for the social safety, and we just make it more effective, the scale leverage is huge. And so those are the kinds of things that I look at across all this. And I think the right way to look at this when you're thinking about it is, think about try an experiment. Part of an experiment's like a seed. Try something, and then you get data from it. You don't get proof, but you go, well, I'm going to work or not. And you have to be willing to say, well, that's not going to work. We're abandoning that. We're trying something else, because it's what's the best bet now. And that kind of experimental investing process is the thing that I do with philanthropic dollars. So,
Yep.
A number of people describe philanthropic dollars as giving them away. I actually don't think of it that way. I think of it as investing, right? And for example, even in Second Harvest Food Bank, I think of it as investing in food, which then allows better educational outcomes for kids, more optimism and less fear for families. All of those things are part of actually investing in their future in a way that's really key. And so I look at it as investing, and then I look at social impact investing, and then I look at commercial investing, and that's the entire.
Oh, right, you have that
path.
part of your job too.
Yes, I do have that part of my job as well.
Yeah, we don't talk as much about the financing side here. I just want to call that out a little bit, both in terms of philanthropy in our world, that willingness to actually let you try something and say that didn't work. I just want to thank you for being a leader in that. You've certainly shown that with us. And I think that so much of philanthropy and I think all of the funders you see on the screen when we start every conference are funders that are willing to do that. And not all funders are, and so we're very lucky, but thank you for being a leader in that. And I also wanted to call out that when we talk about government technology projects, everyone speaks primarily of the iterative development part. When Secretary Batcher talked this morning about the child welfare thing, part of it also is breaking up, using that iterative financing or in the development process as well. When we have sort of the big chunk of money that's dropped on a project, it's really, really hard to do it in an iterative way. And we have so much more work to do as a community, and as we bring in leaders who are not just developers and designers, but are the financiers and the budget managers. That's one of the problems we have to solve, is how do you do financing for tech projects that looks a little bit more like the way Reid invests in seed startups and a little bit less like a giant pile of money fell on us and we got to do something about it.
And look, just to highlight that's one of the things we've learned from the Silicon Valley venture investing. Like, actually, in fact, we think even commercial projects can be killed by too large of an initial round.
Yes.
Right, because you go, okay, no, you really got to be focused on what are the minimal set of things that I prove now to get to the next round, and that keeps a focus, a discipline, a kind of which results in which order that actually make an organization run a lot more effectively, whether that organization is a nonprofit, a government, or very specifically a commercial entity as well.
Yes. Okay, we have just a minute left, but I have to ask you about this because you were talking about leverage, which you've always just had a great way of sort of expressing that. And there's really a lot of ways in which you sort of are using games and sort of gimmicks to get what you want in your philanthropy. And the most recent one, if you guys all saw this, was quite all over the news, was that you offered to donate $5 million to vets organizations if Trump will release his taxes.
Yes, you have. Which he did not do.
Which he unfortunately has not done. But I loved the thinking there. Yes. I mean, what are the other ways in which you try to sort of game the outcome?
Well, one of the things that I think is really important in terms of how do we gain attention, like the new world of social media, how the social media impacts the media, is to say, what are the key themes to get into that cycle of discussion? And so there's a site, CrowdPack, which I'm a social impact investor in. It's again in the kind of the how do you improve the democratic political process, the governance that we live together. And this Marine did this $1 million challenge to Trump, saying, look, people who've most served our country are people who've taken, extraordinary physical risk and kind of, sometimes personal career opportunity risk in order to go do this. To honor them, you should be transparent, open, release your taxes. And I went, that's a great idea. And I can help that get to national attention by doing a matching grant. Part of that was I actually had a whole set of thoughts about how to keep doing elevations of that challenge, which I didn't do mostly because actually, in fact, I thought the misogyny and the comments on a bus about how he can get away with sexual assault was actually, in fact, a more important meme than the taxes one. So I said, okay, I'm going to stop the taxes one to let that meme go. But the way that you do it is you do something that then gives the hack, as it were, is you make a tangible commitment that then becomes news, that then people can talk about why that's important.
Yes.
Right, and then that's that specific thing, and you have to be willing to 100% to stand behind what you're willing to do. And so, for example, I was 100% willing to donate to the organizations that Pete Kernan selected when of course Trump never did the $5 million donation that he promised for Obama's birth certificate, but
So you're just playing it back on him.
Yes.
Well, well played, very well played. So it's nice to be here this week and being able to celebrate some of the examples, I think, of how the bridge has been built. It's still working. I should clarify that when I mentioned about the child welfare thing, that in fact they really did break it into smaller bits. And so the first awards were smaller and will get bigger over time, much like a venture round. So we're making enormous progress. And I want to thank you for being one of those bridge builders, for your support of Code for America, and for being here today and for all that you do.
It's a pleasure and an honor.
Thanks.
Thank you.